Hello, everyone. On behalf of the National Career Development Association, welcome to the NCDA webinar series. Thank you all for being here for this session, which is titled Drag Queens, Tattoos, and Yarmulkes. I'm Melissa Venable, NCDA Director of Professional Development, and just a few tips before we get started. During the webinar session, please keep your microphone muted. We encourage you to hold your questions until the end of the session, but as questions come up, please add them to the chat and we will monitor them there as we go. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording link will be available on the NCDA website and YouTube channel soon. I will also email the link to everyone who has registered for the session. This program is approved for 1 hour of continuing education credit. For NCDA members, it will be automatically added to your record next week. And I will now get us started by turning the mic over to NCDA Board Trustee Courtney Warnsman to introduce tonight's panel. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Drag Queens, Tattoos, and Yarmulkes. And as you know, this is the second part in a series of panel discussions on mental health and careers and different things that can be barriers to a person's ability to get into and sustain fulfilling work. And the work that we're doing here with mental health is so important. I've got two housekeeping items before I get into introducing the panel. The first is an apology, and that is for the spelling of yarmulke. Yay, Montrese made it. Sorry, we thought that our third panelist might not make it because of power outage. So yay, she made it. We'll introduce her in just a moment as well. But I want to apologize for the spelling of yarmulke. When the marketing materials and such came out, I was informed by several people that I should have used the official Yiddish spelling of the word. I meant absolutely no disrespect, and I will do better next time as I am looking at spelling things correctly and respecting the various communities that we're looking at. So thank you for understanding on that. Next, I want to thank our constituency advisory panel, Amanda Chenkin, Ken Meeker, Anush Hansen, and Betsy Sheets for their efforts in putting this panel together. They're the ones who got all the panelists. I'm the one who gets to moderate and have the discussions, but they're the ones to thank for getting our panelists here. We are truly honored to have this group of panelists tell their stories of how a sense of otherness, which often is a result of either conscious or implicit bias, has affected mental health. They will then share with us insights on what we as career practitioners can do to help clients with similar experiences and provide perspective to employers who may be looking for people with the unique skills and extraordinary value that diversity can bring to the workplace. We hope to inspire change, promote empathy, and champion the cause of every individual as they strive for personal and professional fulfillment. I'm going to dive into introducing our panel. Please pardon me, I'm going to read it because I don't want to miss anything. But before I get to the panel who is here, I want to share the story of someone who is not with us today. We invited a rabbi from the LGBTQIA+ community to participate. And after careful consideration, he determined that it could negatively impact his relationship with his congregation, and so chose not to participate. We thought about changing the title of the webinar, but decided to keep it because his reason for not participating is central to our purpose. Being unable to show up as our full and authentic selves at work is in itself a factor in mental health that's worthy of discussion. And so with that being said, Drag Queens, Tattoos, and Yarmulkes. So on to our panel. As I said, I'm going to read this because I don't want to miss anything. We have Johnny Crowder, who is a suicide abuse survivor, TEDx speaker, Billboard-charting heavy metal musician, and the founder and CEO of Cope Notes, a text-based mental health platform that provides daily support to users in nearly 100 countries around the world. Armed with a decade of clinical treatment, a psychology degree from the University of Central Florida, and 10+ years of peer support and public advocacy through the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Johnny's youthful vigor for mental health has impacted millions of lives around the globe. Montrese Peyton Hardy is a staunch advocate for accessibility, belonging, inclusion, diversity, and equality, ABIDE, Her lived experience is foundational to her passion for creating greater digital inclusion and accessibility. Montrese is intentional and strategic in her approach to any subject. She possesses the education, training, and experience necessary to provide honest, candid perspectives on a variety of important issues, as well as topics from her own intersectional realities: African American with graduate degrees, single working mothers, people with disabilities, and, I appreciate this because I'm from here, vegans in Texas, aka meat country. Bonnie Violet is a trans femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist and digital chaplain. She is also a YouTuber and host of the A Queer Chaplain podcast with series such as Drag and Spirituality, Trans Spirit, and Faith Leaders. Bonnie Violet is co-host of Splintered Grace with her conservative Christian aunt and the At the CCC Recovery podcast. She's the creator and founder of Allies Linked for the Prevention of HIV and AIDS, ALPHA, and the annual Drag and Spirituality Summit. She has shared her experience, strength, and hope with HIV for 24 years, recovering from drugs, alcohol, and sexual assault, among other things, for 14 years. She's talked in classrooms, community centers, churches, online, and pretty much anywhere else she is invited. As a queer chaplain, she's present with people in death and dying, helping to lace one's narrative with a spiritual thread to remind one of their resilience, strength, and faith in self, create serenity in the now, and instill hope for their future. Oh, she also does weddings, memorials, and other rituals in and out of drag, so feel free to reach out to her about that. But I am sure y'all are already tired of hearing me talk, so I'd like to give each of our panelists a few minutes to share their stories with us. And after they've done that, then we have some planned questions to get the discussion rolling. And as Melissa said, if questions come up, please put them in the chat and we will have some time at the end for some Q&A there. So, Johnny, will you kick us off?
Sure. I never know how to, when someone's like, tell us your story, I'm like, how do I take 30 years and squeeze it inside of 30 seconds? So I'll be as high level as possible and then save all the juicy parts for the questions. But basically, I grew up with as many diagnoses as you can name in the mental health spectrum, and then multiple abusive members of my household. Basically, everyone in my house hurt me, including me, growing up. And then didn't start treatment until way too late. I was 15 years old when I started treatment. I should have started way younger than that. But I didn't want to go to therapy. I didn't want to take medication. I didn't want to meet with a clinician. So I was very care resistant. Even for years into my treatment, I would show up, but I wouldn't participate. So I eventually started taking psychology courses, went to school, went to UCF for psychology. I earned a CRPS, so I'm a certified recovery peer specialist. I've been working in the behavioral health field for God knows how long at this point. But what was really cool was I had a really difficult time getting hired, if you can imagine, like death metal singer, covered in tattoos, very clearly mentally ill. I wasn't exactly the most hireable candidate. So I had a lot of difficulty getting hired and staying hired. So for the last 6 years, I've been my own boss. I'm the CEO of a mental health organization now, and I get to hire people like me who have had challenges getting hired before. And it's such a cool 360. But long story short, I am a person who really enjoys all things creative and really enjoys celebrating recovery, not making mental health conversations all doom and gloom and dark, but more celebrating the fact that my life now isn't the way that it was. And I love being able to share that with people to give them hope that their circumstances and their lives and their brains can and will change when they put work into it.
Great. Thank you so much. Montrese, welcome. I'm glad your power is on, or that you found a place to be able to log in. So we're glad you're here. Share with us, a little bit of your background and your story, please.
Sure thing, Courtney. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Montrese Payton Hardy, and thank you for that introduction and reading the bio as well, Courtney. like Johnny said, these are a bit of a challenge, but I guess the bullet points. I am an African-American single mom living with disability. That came up later in life. I was not born specifically with these disabilities that give me the most challenges right now, which are my vision. I am legally blind. In my right eye, my vision is 2400, which means that I have no light perception there. And in my left eye, I have a roughly 10% or so, 10 degree rather, visual field. And so it's like seeing through the equivalent of maybe a stirrer if you look through one eye, a coffee stirrer, that is. So that is the vision disability. And then this year I was also diagnosed with ADHD. So that's been fun. But I've been getting to know all of my neurodivergent superpowers, and that has been a pretty interesting journey thus far. A couple other things about me really briefly. I do some work with and met Ken Meeker through American Foundation for the Blind. Ken is one of my favorite people on the face of the earth. And I am so grateful to not only know him, but to have done any projects with him, including our podcast, The Difficulty. Hopefully it's okay for me to like totally like just drop that in there. And then the other last point, I've been doing work professionally as a disability inclusion specialist, if you will, speaking, writing specifically for that. I've written for Bold Blind Beauty, among a number of other publications. Do some social media influencing, micro-influencing, if you will, on these topics as well. And I speak and write a lot for parents who live with disabilities, which is a topic that does not get enough discourse or attention. So those are just a couple of points about me. Thank you so much, Courtney.
Thank you, Montrese. And Bonnie, you're up.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Bonnie Violet. Yeah, I was trying to think where to begin that hasn't already been said. I grew up in Idaho, and Idaho is actually where I live now. I'm not there right now, as you can see in the background. I'm in Chicago, but I grew up in a very small town, a town of about 3,000 people. There was lots of drugs and alcohol around me growing up. I worked really, I don't know, I guess I worked really hard to not like be a part of that or become that, everything that was around me. So I worked really hard in school and those sorts of things. I feel like I don't know where to say. I think I started a nonprofit organization when I was 24 years old, Allies Link for the Prevention of HIV and AIDS. And I think that was really kind of the beginning of me beginning to where my identity or my identities began to be my employment in some ways. And part of that was like an accident. Like I started an HIV/AIDS organization in Idaho because there wasn't anything there. And I was a young person who got HIV at 19 years old and just didn't have the resources that I needed. And most of it was just around social support, just knowing that I'm not alone in what I'm going through. And really, I think one of the things that I've come to learn in all of my reiterations of myself is just the importance of, well, one, I've continued to see whether I'm working with drag artists or trans people or people living with HIV or people in recovery, the isolation is a really challenging thing for folks in the sense of just feeling like they're so different or there's so much distance between them and other people. And the more conversations you have with people, there's a lot of sameness that we have, but I also think there's even more for us to learn in our difference. And so I think, where was I going with all that? I continue to kind of just trying to build the world that I want to be in because I've struggled to see it around me. And in doing that, I found out that I'm not the only one. There are others that are kind of doing similar things. So I think trying to see where to go with all that, but I've just been, now I'm really focusing Oh, I think the big thing is just also integration. I've had to spend most of my life just spending time in those parts. Like there was a time when my whole identity was centered around my HIV status, or around my sexual orientation, or around my recovery. And one of the things that I really started to do with drag artists was help them lace their narrative with a spiritual thread. And part of that was really helping folks integrate. You know, there are people who could be oneness blessers on Sunday and then, you know, be dancing as Penetration, the drag queen, in the bar on Saturday night, and those two worlds never really connecting, even though they are very much connected. And so really helping folks see that, especially in the spiritual realm of things. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. Not a great start, but it's something.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And it's interesting because one of the things that I've been thinking about with all of this is the three of you are obviously very different people. And as Bonnie mentioned, you know, there's a conversation to be had both in our differences and our sameness. And so what I hear in the sameness from the three of you, as well as I'm sure everybody sitting here online, is there are so many different variables that make us who we are. And it's not just that one thing that identifies us. I didn't realize, and one of the things I had planned to do was listen for things that y'all do say that you have in common. What I didn't expect a commonality to be was the concept of superpowers. Montrese brought it up, and Johnny brought up the superpowers when he and I talked. And so I'd love for y'all to talk about that a little bit more, about how those superpowers, period. So Montrese, you want to go first?
Sure, I will be brief to give the co-panelists plenty of time to elaborate. But before me, I named neurodiversity, specifically ADHD, as a superpower just because in terms of its binary opposite and all of the challenges with it, I've really found a way to embrace and be empowered by the different strategies I've learned to work around what all this has changed for my life and how I think, how I approach work, professionalism, how I even support others. And so on the one hand, there are challenges with something like an ADHD and blindness, and especially acquiring both later in life. One challenge with blindness is that because blindness is a spectrum, and most people don't realize that I am not totally and completely blind in both eyes. Therefore, I fall into this very weird space of being able to see and yet not. And by that being my situation, I have to find different ways of navigating in public spaces. I do use a mobility cane, for example. That is a superpower in itself because it keeps me safe and others, to be honest. And then again, going back to ADHD, learning about different tricks to manage my time. I had to be very real with myself and understand that I had this magical way that I approach thinking about planning and trying to set up meetings and appointments, and it was not working for me or anyone else. It was causing more problems just because it was not realistic, and I had to keep time in front of me. And it's really interesting because many young people these days, when I say young, I'm thinking of my children's age, which is tweens, Gen Alpha, if you will, and their interest, their weirdness with reading, what is that called? A regular clock. I want to say regular clock, but that's not what it's called. Analog clock. It's really helpful to have something like that in front of me to show me exactly how much time I do or do not have. It's also a superpower because to me, I have to tell myself, make sure that you are planning 2 hours ahead for whatever it is. So all of my challenges, I have flipped upside down, embraced them as superpowers because they are empowering once I get a hold of my systems and navigating my space. Hopefully that answers that question a bit, and I'm happy to clarify anything that is not clear.
Yeah, no, that's great. And like I said, Johnny and I had talked about superpowers when we first talked. So Johnny, would you share a little bit on your thoughts of the superpowers?
Yeah, first of all, I want to clarify, I don't think you need mental illness to be creative. However, I'm just going to give 2 quick examples of so I worked in creative fields before I ran a mental health organization. So I worked at like a creative agency, an ad agency, a marketing agency. I did graphic design, copywriting, directing videos and commercials, designing billboards. So like all sorts of creative stuff. And I think 2 aspects of my OCD made me very good at those things. Again, I don't think you need to have OCD to be creative. I'm just saying these 2 things I noticed manifested themselves in creative environments. I'm keeping it to 2 because I could talk forever about it and I shouldn't. The first thing is anyone with OCD has extraordinary attention to detail. That's if anyone has ever seen, I mean, even the most basic OCD trope is fixing a painting on the wall that's crooked, where 99% of people wouldn't see it. In a creative setting, this made me an extraordinary proofreader. My art director would send me proofs, and I would be able to tell if something was a pixel misaligned to the right or to the left. And he would assure me that I already quadruple checked, it's aligned. And I'm like, I'm telling you, dude, I'm looking right at it. You should check it a 5th time. And sure enough, he would check it and he'd be like, how did you see that? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to see this stuff, but I do. And it brought a lot of value in the workplace, the same way that if you're not familiar with OCD, a big part of it is thoughts that are not rational, that you understand are not rational, but your behaviors and thoughts orient themselves around a thought that you recognize as not rational. So, for example, I wouldn't step on cracks because I believed that something in the crack, like a tiny blade or something, would cut my foot. So I didn't step on cracks for years and years. I think that those are the ingredients of a great storyteller, is someone who can literally reorient their whole life around something that is not true. That I knew if someone said, take a microscope and look, you see any blades, any tiny blades in there? I'd say, of course not, but I'm still not going to step on them. That adherence to a story can be leveraged in a creative environment to build brands, to write commercials. I think all of us tell each other stories every single day. When you get in your car, you tell yourself the story that it will get you safely to where you're going. Maybe that's not the most creative story in the world, but someone with OCD tells himself the story that if they don't count the exact number of Cheerios on each spoonful of Cheerios, that the world's going to explode or something. That right there, and I'm using that because that's a literal example of something that I believed. Those are the ingredients of a great storyteller. And I always encourage people who are facing these things, not only like in a perfect world, Montrese is an example of someone who like had the ability to turn things into superpowers. In a perfect world, everybody would be able to do that from day one. But even if you haven't made that switch yet, where maybe you're living with the challenges, but you haven't started leveraging them to be superpowers yet, I still think the core elements, it's like you have the hydrogen, you have the oxygen, it's not yet water, but all the ingredients are there, you know?
So a little bit later in the webinar, one of the questions that I had that we will get back to for all of you career people is, Johnny and Montrese were talking about recognizing those superpowers in themselves. And I'm hoping that later on in the session, they can share with us ways that we can help our clients to identify those superpowers and to help our clients from that perspective. Now, when I introduced the session, we started talking, I mentioned a little bit about implicit bias and assumptions. So I'm going to make everybody a little tiny bit uncomfortable right now. Raise your hand, either here or online, if you have ever made an assumption about somebody just on the way they looked when they walked in the room. Okay. We've all done it, right? And even those of us who know better, we've still done it. So what I would like for each of our panelists to share, I'm going to start with Bonnie. Bonnie, when someone first sees you or meets you, what are some of the assumptions that they have? And then as they get to know you, what surprises them that may or may not align with those initial assumptions?
Yeah, it probably depends on what day they they meet me, on what their impression of me would be. But I think in drag in particular, there's a lot of negative assumptions about people who do drag, why we do drag, what type, like just what it means. There's very much, especially right now, I live in Idaho. Recently they tried to make it illegal to do drag. So I think there's that right now. There's some interesting rhetoric around what it means to be a drag artist, and it's very hyper. People want to sexualize drag queens and drag artists when sexuality, beyond just what human sexuality is, just in existing, it really is not for most of us a sexual thing. It's about performance, and for me, I am not a stage performer. Most of the things that I do in drag are spiritual in nature. I preach, I speak, I officiate weddings and memorials. And the thing that I love the most is I love just getting in face and getting in drag and just walking down the streets and seeing people's face light up and their eyes get wide. And, there's just something that happens. I believe I'm giving life to them. And that gives me life as well. And so I really see my drag as my calling and what it is that I'm created to be in this moment in time, in order to be a part of making the world just a little bit better than the way that I guess it was in the beginning for me.
I love that. This idea of you walking down the street and just making people's days brighter. I mean, how much would we all love to be able to do that? Just being us, right? Johnny, what assumptions do people make about you, and what surprises them after the fact?
One of my favorite things, so I have two memories that jump out at me. One is that I was on this panel and I had shared, this was at a live event, and someone during Q&A, and everyone had shared their experiences. And then during Q&A, someone was like, much like Johnny was sharing about his addiction. And I was like, I never said anything about addiction. And it was so funny that the person had sat there and listened to the whole panel and heard me talk all about my story. And then in their head, they kind of built a narrative like, well, for sure he used drugs because look at him. And I was like, that's such a funny thing. And that happens all the time. Like, I do not drink. I do not use drugs. I've never tried alcohol or any drugs. I've never smoked anything. And that people don't believe me. They're like, surely that can't be true. And I think that's always, initially it would bother me. Now I think it's fun. Same with like, I'm a big Jesus person. I never saw that coming in my whole life. I never expected that to be the case. And most people don't believe me when I tell them that that's the case. And then also that I work in mental health. I also don't say curse words, which a lot of people don't believe. They're like, you're in a metal band and you don't say curse words. Like, there are so many things about me that are contradictory that I used to shy away from. And now I think there are some of my favorite, like I really like, has anyone ever read the E.E. Cummings poem where he says, do I contradict myself? Of course I do. I contain multitudes. Of course I contradict myself, or something like that. It's like one of my favorite lines. So I like that. I think everybody has things about them that are very contradictory. I just think that when people meet me and see the way I look, mine are more in your face. Like sometimes people will see me give a keynote and afterwards they're like, you're actually really well spoken. And I love that phrase. I love phrasing it like that. Like, I'm a professional keynote speaker for 13 years. And they're like, well, it's just, yeah, you're actually pretty articulate, all things considered. I'm like, that's so funny that you would say that. So overall, I think I'm kind of I'm in the camp of, originally I'd get offended, and I realized that I was the person doing that. They weren't offending me. I was getting offended by the way I was interpreting it. So I've started owning it. And then now, like, I'm getting my throat tattooed when I get home. And I was so nervous that I asked my agent, am I going to lose gigs? Like, because I speak for corporate groups and hospital systems and like all over the country. And I'm like, am I going to make your job harder? And he said, first of all, Johnny, my job is already hard. Look at you. You are so hard to book with these corporate groups. But he was like, second of all, a group that won't book you with a throat tattoo already won't book you now. And the groups that do want to book you will want to book you more because you're more of the person that you always have known yourself to be. And that's what they want. So it's kind of picking, like Bonnie said, some people, when they see Bonnie, they light up. And you have to pick, like, am I going to be my true authentic self and make these people smile? Or am I going to hide my authentic self to make these other people who don't like the real me happy? And you have to understand that if you are yourself, you are going to contradict yourself, and just kind of having fun with surprising people, you know?
Well, isn't it interesting though that even in all that, you went to your agent and you said, is this going to be problematic? And just the simple fact that you and the rest of us have to ask those questions just because of the perceptions that people have before they know our stories or before they care about our stories. Montrese, I'm going to ask you to share something specific. One of the things that you and I talked about, and this gets along with those assumptions, is I remember you telling me about a time when you were doing your thing, cruising along. You did not have your mobility cane out at the time. And you were talking to people. And, you know, if you look at Montrese right now, probably if she hadn't told us that she was visually impaired, we wouldn't know that. But then you told me, then you take out that mobility cane and things change. So how do people's assumptions change for you just when the mobility cane comes out of your briefcase or wherever it magically appears from?
Magically appears from. I love that. It makes me sound almost like Looney Tunes in the act situation. I love that.
So gadget, Montrese.
Right. So long story short, doing another webinar, actually, the host, she was explaining that there was a situation where the neighborhood had a free-for-all type of setup. Oh my gosh, I can't think of the best name for it, but basically if anyone had something to give away, they would leave it out on their porch or somewhere, and people in the neighborhood could like connect in their Facebook group or something of that nature, and feel free to go by and get it. And what I was explaining to her is that she had a great amount of privilege to be able to do that. And my privilege goes two ways. It either is there or not, whether I have my cane or not. If I'm walking in even my own neighborhood with my cane, I believe and I have felt that I am perceived as far less of a threat or what has been known as an angry Black woman if I have my cane, because there are many more perceptions about who I am not and what I cannot do and what ability I do not have when I have this cane. Another point, speaking of the cane, and thank you for mentioning that, Courtney, even just this past weekend, I was out hanging out with my kiddos, and they are tweens, 10, 11-ish, going on 40 and 41, but they, we were out and it was starting to get dark. I normally avoid that because I don't like to be outside in the dark with my kids with my cane, because I feel like I look like a victim, because it's assumed that there's no way that I can fight back if I was attacked. I look like less of a threat because there's no way that I can totally see anything, or there's the assumption that I am, again, totally blind. Whereas if I'm walking in the same space without my cane, well, then there's all of this ability of what I can do. and how I may be feeling. Oh gosh, dare I not wear a smile, because then I absolutely look frustrated. If I'm carrying anything else, it could unfortunately be misunderstood as something else. If I'm walking too fast, and that has actually happened, walking too fast in a particular space, especially without my cane, anything like that can make me appear to be something of a threat, depending on where it is that I am, where it is that I'm going. So those are just a few of the misperceptions, and I hope that was what you were kind of looking for there, Courtney.
Right on target. So now I want to shift the conversation a little bit. One of the other topics that came up with each of you when we talked individually was the importance of conversations and the importance of asking questions and communication. And Bonnie, I would like, so Bonnie has a podcast called Splintered Grace with her Aunt Tina, right? Aunt Tina, who is conservative Christian woman. And I spent some time listening to Bonnie and Tina's podcast. And it seemed to me that whole podcast came out of the realization of Bonnie and Tina and the assumptions that they had about each other, and having this podcast to talk through those. So Bonnie, would you share with us a little bit about how that podcast has, I don't know, healed a relationship, or, you know, what that has done in terms of a communication standpoint?
Yeah, my aunt is pretty great. As a transgender person, she's the only person in my family who really who calls me by my name and sees me for who I am. And she's the conservative Christian who I would assume has a lot of unkind things to say about me and think about me. And so my aunt was my hero growing up. She was the one that got out of that little small town too and went out into the world. And I just kind of followed her footsteps, you know. And then I actually even moved out to Arizona where she was living at the time. I lived with her. We both were like Jesus freaks into church and just, you know, like trying to live our best lives. I had a Christian t-shirt company with her. And then next thing I know, I was diagnosed with HIV. And then that kind of pushed me out of the closet as a queer person at that time. And I didn't know how to talk about that to people because I'd never had it talked about before, especially in church. And church was kind of like my safe place. And so my aunt and I then kind of like I took care of her. She had 4 kids. She was a single mother, and her kids were almost like I was like their kid sister or something, you know what I mean? Like I just was like, I took care of them constantly. And then all of a sudden I was just out of their life. And for 20 years, we were just kind of out of each other's lives and we didn't know what to do with each other. And about 3 or 4 years ago, on my 20-year anniversary with HIV, I went out to Arizona and she took me to a church in a dress. And at that time I was a bearded man. And, you know, she took me to her church and I was just like, what the heck, you know, and it was the church that I went to when I had to leave. And so that was kind of the beginning. And my aunt has come a long way. If you listen to the podcast in the beginning, she's not calling me Bonnie Violet. She's calling me by my old name. And now she's at a point where she's like, if somebody calls me, like somebody wrote in my comments, oh, what a hideous man. And she was just like, but you're not a man. And so I think, and one of the things that I've had to really do, because we do have a history of, one, I was really abused by her and traumatized by her, but a lot of that was my own perception of what was happening. And some of it was true. She did think some of those things for a while, but eventually that did change. And so I think the thing that I've had to really try to be mindful of is to remember that to assume the best, at least with her and my relationship with her. I can't do that with everyone, but in this particular situation, I could. And honestly, I feel most attacked and most at harm by like conservative Christian people. And so I'm like, and I don't want to have like enemies or to feel poorly about other people. And I feel like if I'm going to work through that judgment or that stigmatization or that inability for me to understand. The one place I'm going to be able to do that is probably with my aunt. And so I think that's the big thing is for me is just not assuming the best, and then giving myself space and time when I need to. And I think for the both of us is that we both have agreed and stated that we want to be in a relationship with one another, and have continued to show up for one another even when it didn't always feel correct. And it's been amazing.
Could we all just have a bumper sticker now that says assume the best? I mean, there's just something about that, I mean, Bonnie, you might have solved all the world's problems if we all walk into things assuming the best rather than going the other direction with it. I want to shift gears a little bit now to getting y'all's take on some things that we can do as career advisors to help people with their, finding work that's fulfilling. One of the things that hit me is that I think many of us, I'm not going to say that, I'm going to only talk for myself. When we're out in public and you see someone who looks a little bit different, it's, oh, don't stare, when you're a little kid, don't stare, don't ask questions, and so we're sort of socialized almost not to have those conversations. And so I know that I struggle sometimes to ask a question because I don't want to offend anyone, or I don't want to, I don't want to offend anyone. So I would love to hear all of your thoughts on how to best open these conversations and be able to have that really authentic discussion with people who may be different than we are. Johnny, I see you over there kind of nodding and smiling.
Yeah, it makes me think of this tour. So my band did this tour with I'm not joking, the name of the genre is cyber goth. So we toured with this cyber goth band called Combi Christ. I'm not making any of this up. This is real. And so one of the bands has like big flaming pentagrams on stage and they're burning Bibles. And then they get on stage and their drummer has like this, I can't even explain it. It was like the most ridiculous, one of the most ridiculous tours I've ever done. And we're a metal band. So we're like the heaviest band on the whole bill. And I've been touring since I was 17, I'm 31. So I'm no stranger to like going to metal shows, but I'm a huge stranger to going to whatever this was, like the cyber goth scene. So I remember specifically being at the merge table and having people come up with like these long neon green dreads and like these huge platform boots and like vampire teeth and like just, I mean, the cyberpunk goggles with spikes on them. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. And what I noticed is that if I sat next to someone like that on a train, I might not say anything. But because I was in an environment where I felt like I'm supposed to be here, you're supposed to be here, there's a shared interest here, I would literally go, what is with the glasses? I would literally say it. What's happening here? What am I looking at, dude? School me on this. Did you make those? Were they expensive? Where'd you get them? Like, I have so many questions. And I think that like me feeling comfortable in that, like, I'm at a metal show, you're at a metal show, we already have this shared bond. So I can ask you a question just like you're my friend walking in with those. I'm like, you have to tell me the story about these boots. You can't walk in and pretend you're not wearing those boots. What is happening? That like sort of genuine curiosity. Like, tell me about, did you make that? How long did this take? Where did you learn how to do this? Like those types of questions. I think that if people were more comfortable with each other, like if we assumed, let's pretend that we're both at the same metal show, we'd feel a lot more comfortable asking those questions. But because we all feel so siloed, we tiptoe around how we ask and we make it awkward. But if you're genuinely curious, 99% of the time, someone dressed like that isn't going to go, I can't believe they asked me about my spiky goggles. Like they'll be like, yeah, I spent a lot of time on them. Actually, I'm really proud of them. Like when people ask me about my tattoos, my only rule is don't touch me. Sometimes people will like grab my arm and pick it up like I'm an object, and that absolutely drives me up the wall. I can't believe it. But if someone is sitting on like sitting next to me or walks by and is like, where'd you get that work done? And like, oh, I have a question. How'd you get the color to set? Or was it hard to heal? Like real, genuine curiosity. I take my headphones out. I have a real conversation with the person. So I think a big part of it is like, if you cling to if you're not actually curious, don't ask, because people can pick it up right away. If you're just trying to like make conversation or whatever, it's weird and awkward. But if you see something that you're genuinely interested in and you ask in a way that you would ask a friend, I think most of the time you'd be surprised, setting dependent. I'm sure there's some situations where, use your spidey senses on whether or not it's appropriate, but I think you'd be surprised to see how willing some people are to talk about. I mean, when I got on, I was like, Bonnie, your lipstick looks wild. And she's like, it's not actually lipstick. These are real stones that I hand set. Like that willingness to share and connect over something that you don't know, I don't think it has to be a burden if you don't treat it like one. If you treat it like you're really curious and you want to know, I think you'd be surprised at how willing people are to share.
It's interesting how the words genuine, authentic, those have come up throughout the conversation. And I think, what I'm hearing is just be real. I mean, obviously easier said than done, but just be real. Montrese, I know that when you and I talked, you also told me a story about, I think someone had some questions about you, but rather than asking you, they asked your sister or someone close to you rather than coming to you. And so I'm assuming that you would rather we come to you rather than going around you and talking about you like you're not there. Is that accurate?
Yes. So I will hit that in 2 points. First of all, I agree with probably 100% of everything that Johnny said, 100%. And I'm going to reiterate one of his points. Also, Bonnie, kudos to you. That is some patience that to set in each stone. I need a tutorial. After that, at least after this, maybe, hopefully we can reconnect. As far as answering that question, Courtney, yes, it happens often when I have my cane and dare I look like the trope and actually be wearing sunglasses and walk into a restaurant. More often than not, people will address any family member, even my children, before they address me, to ask me what it is that I want off of the menu or something of that nature. So to address this overall or the overarching question, come directly to a person and respect the fact that they are a human being and that they have the competence to answer your question is going to be, and it's going to go a long way and it's going to be helpful. Please also, my encouragement for anyone with visual impairment or disability, don't assume that just because they may or may not be able to see you and may or may not be able to see your facial expressions or your body movements, that they can't sense that. That genuine authenticity is still something that can be sensed no matter what. And so coming with questions without gestures, no, not gestures, but moreover without touching is going to be, that's going to go far, not only as a woman who lives with disability, but also as an African-American woman. I feel that in my body, my space is very rarely protected. I actually have had people, and this has happened more than 2 times when traveling, different people, and I've worn my own Christian shirts showing that I'm very much so clearly a person who believes in and understands prayer and so on. And yet if someone comes up to me while I have my mobility cane, assuming that I want prayer, I've had people walk up to me and literally just start praying for me. And that has been incredibly uncomfortable and in violation of my space, let alone, as many may have heard, as far as touching an African-American woman's hair and so on. All of those things have very much so been experiences of mine. And so it's so helpful to lead with words, with your curiosity, and wait for permission for coming closer into one's space in order to be touched or not. But yes, I've had those experiences, Courtney, and I've also learned from them as well.
Thank you. You know, it sounds like it's assumptions kind of in a different way. And when you talked about, even though people with visual impairment may not be able to see us, that I think you said sense or feel. I can't remember exactly what word you used there.
That's correct.
But
Sense and just generally feel, listen for. There's so many different ways to give cues about what your motives and intentions are besides anything visual.
Yeah.
Even
Another
the term
superpower.
Yes.
Another superpower, that ability to sense those. We're down to about 10 minutes and I want people to have a chance to ask questions, but I would like to ask each of our panelists one more. Actually, it's a two-part question, and that is, as you were developing your identities, your careers, as you were going, what do you wish that a career advisor, a career coach, someone would have asked or said to help you on that journey, either a little earlier or whatever it may be? How can we as career practitioners help our clients get on that journey? Bonnie, you wanna start us?
Sure. My first thought that comes to mind is that there is a lot of emotional labor that it takes as othered people, however way you want to label that. And so I think when you're working with folks who are different from yourself, asking them questions, so many questions about themselves or some things that might be more generic. Google is free, as one of my favorite drag artists says, Google is free. And so I think one of the things that folks can do is not put it all on the person that you're working with to teach you about what it means to be trans or a drag queen or a person living with HIV, and actually go and find books that we write or watch movies that we make about us, listen to how we talk about our stories. And so, because there are folks who have done the emotional labor and who, were in a space that they could share that for you. So that it's more of a partnership, because we notice that. I think one thing that comes up for me is with pronouns as a trans person, I get mispronounced a lot, and sometimes people want to make a big deal of it. And one of the nobody in my family uses my pronouns except for my aunt. And so she'll use she pronouns with me, even when I'm not in the room. And so I think those are other things as well, is that just don't acknowledge that we exist only when we're in the room, and bring us actually into the rooms that we're not in. Like, ensure that the spaces that you're in that we aren't would be comfortable for us to come into, or would be safer for us to come into. So I feel like that's something that kind of came up for me. I think one of the last things I want to say too is oftentimes people want to tell us how brave we are. And I really feel that's a backhanded compliment that people really need to explore about why they think it's brave for somebody to be authentic or just living their life. I choose to live this way, but also this is just who I am. This is just how I am, and so I think to think that I'm so brave, I think that says a lot about you, and maybe some of the things that you're unwilling to be authentic about yourself.
That's
or even judgments that you have about that group of people or whatever.
Exploring our own biases, our own implicit biases, and what we're asking, what we're really saying when we ask those questions. Montrese, best piece of advice for us career advisors?
Usually the time I'll just keep it down to one. My goodness, that was beautifully said, Bonnie. My note is to add to what Bonnie said. In addition to asking those questions, really customizing support to one person. It's very helpful. Yes, Google is free. I say that all the time, especially to my children. But learning these different things for yourself is super helpful, and coming into a coaching one-on-one to say, I have these understandings about this. However, how can I tailor this even more for you? I think goes a long way. In addition to that, I want to make a note that when one is customizing their support by asking questions, it's really to get an understanding of where people are in their journey and their relationship with whatever their quote unquote otherness is. For example, my relationship with my disabilities has grown and changed and been through highs and lows over the past 5 years. I've come to a much stronger healing place. That is not always the case every day. And so asking those questions to get a feel for where someone is on a given day, where they have been in their journey, what trauma they have, how one can help lead and guide through that, if at all. Also, has there been any conversation, if there's a trauma conversation with therapists, et cetera? Those things are going to be super, super helpful in the end when it comes to conversations about relationship and even leadership at some point on anyone's career trajectory in career coaching, I would assume. So that would be my point.
Thank you. And Johnny, I'm going to let you close us out on this. And I know you are probably in a position where you're about to have to jump out of that chair and go run to your speaking engagement. So what would you like to tell us about how to work with our clients?
One thing that really squashed me when I was having trouble getting hired and staying hired was I kept thinking, like, for every one of me, there's 99 normal candidates. And why on earth would an employer not choose one of the 99? I mean, they'd have to be really hard pressed for talent to choose me. And I wish that somebody would have said, like, turn that around and be like, who on earth wants to hire 99 carbon copies of the exact same person when they could hire someone? Do you know how many interviews and a hiring manager has to sit through to find somebody like you, to find somebody with those unique experiences and skills? They have to do interview after interview. They're slogging them out a dozen at a time, and they can't find a Johnny. They can't find a Bonnie. They can't find a Montrese. They are digging through piles of applications, waiting to find someone who stands out. And I wish I would have known that everything I've experienced in my life has equipped me to do things in a way that most people don't do them for whatever reason. And I wish I viewed that as a competitive advantage in the marketplace, because as I've learned about the hiring ecosystem, now I'm a hiring manager. So I have a staff. We have to hire people. And I'm specifically looking for people who are different, who break the mold, who think outside the box, who are creative, who have really faced difficult things and built resilience that other people who have had more normal lives might not have that same degree of resilience. So I wish somebody would have said, listen, I don't love everything that has happened in your life. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying if you were a soda, it would be bad that you got shaken up. But I think you're a protein shake, and they taste way, way, way better when they get shaken up like that, you know?
Yeah, y'all are amazing. I could listen to all three of you talk all night long. Unfortunately, we are at our hour. If anyone does have any questions, I believe Melissa said we can leak over a little bit. So are there any questions that you have for our panel before we wrap up? Not seeing anything in the chat. Melissa did just give a thumbs up that we can take a little bit more time if we'd like. I just want to thank you all. When I say it's an honor, I'm not just using that word. I know that all of you are people who travel around talking to groups, doing things like this. And for you to come and share your stories with us, I got so much just little tidbits that are really going to help me in working with my clients moving forward. So we really, really appreciate your time. And y'all go do their podcasts, all of that. I've listened to enough of it to know that there aren't enough hours in the day to listen to these three people, because they have amazing perspectives on our world and the way that we all fit. So y'all have a great night. Thank you so much for being here.